Hey, this is Waylon from Swiftwood Bows, and I want to show you how I back a bow with sturgeon skin. Sturgeon skin is one of my favorite backings. It looks really cool, it's unique, and it's tough stuff that adds some added protection to your bow. Here's a bow that I've been working on. It's not quite finished yet, but it gives you an idea of what the sturgeon skin can look like on the bow. This is an Osage bow, obviously with some snaky character to it. And I've got the sturgeon skin here on the back of the bow. So when we look at the sturgeon skin, this is what it's going to look like when you're ready to work with it. So I've got two matching pieces from the same fish. And what you're seeing here is, this would have been the head of the fish. This would have been the tail of the fish. Along its back here, between the two skins, there would have been a big spiny row of scales on its back, but that got cut off. But also on the side of each fish, there is this row of scales called scutes. Below the scutes here is the belly section of the fish, and this darker part up here is the back section of the fish. So you're going to have that on each of the skins. Now, you have a choice to make depending on how big your skins are. If you have really big, wide skins, you'll have the option of trimming right here along the edge of the scutes and just using either this belly section or the back section to back your bow with. And that's going to leave off this prominent row of scutes here, and you're just going to get these smaller scales on the back of your bow, and it gives for a different look. Alternatively, you can include this row of scales going right down the back of your bow like I have on the bow that I showed you in the beginning of the video. So either one is a viable option. You just have to decide from an aesthetic standpoint which one you like better, or just work with the nature of your skins. A lot of skins don't have the width to really pull off avoiding the row of scutes. So one important note about sturgeon skins is where you're getting them from and their legality. So there's quite a few species of sturgeon around the world. A lot of them have lower populations or are endangered. We have some native sturgeon populations here in the United States, and some of them have legal fishing seasons. So it's possible to acquire skins from native fish that have been legally caught. Just be careful, make sure that you are able to trust who you're getting the skins from, that they did catch them legally. You don't want to end up with illegal sturgeon parts, because that could get you in some trouble. My skins are all from Russian sturgeon that are farmed here in the United States, legally and ethically, and so I have a good source of skins that I don't have to worry about the legality of in terms of the fishing population. So if you're interested in trying out some sturgeon skins, get in touch with me and I can sell you some of the Russian sturgeon skins that I get. Now from a bow making perspective, sturgeon skins are more akin to rawhide than, say, snake skins. They're thick and tough. They provide protection to the back of the bow, both in terms of protecting against nicks and damage in the field, but also some added tension strength to prevent splinters from lifting and that sort of thing. So from a structural standpoint, they're a step up from your typical decorative skin. They kind of give you the best of both worlds, from the protection of rawhide and having a really cool look to them. So there's just a couple things that make sturgeon skins a little bit different in how I apply them than your typical rawhide backing. So that's going to be something that I'll highlight in the process of the video, but I'll just kind of point out the two main things that will be different. So when you're looking at the skins here, you can see there's the light side and there's the dark side, and what you may not be able to see is that there's some translucent quality to the skin. They let light through, and so were I just to put this skin here on the back of this Osage bow that I'm going to be backing, the orange color of the Osage wood is going to show through, especially on this lighter side. And there's nothing wrong with that if you like the look of that, by all means. But I like to have a more consistent dark quality to the sturgeon skins. It really helps the lighter color scales kind of pop out and look almost like a starry sky. And so what I do to help that is to dye the back of the bow black using some alcohol-based leather dye. And so I'll show you how I do that during the process. And the other thing is that sturgeon skins are a little bit oily. And so when I prepare them, I wash them really well with dish detergent. Once they're dry, I degrease them with acetone, and that's usually plenty to make them good to go. But it's always a good idea after you've soaked them to wash them again with some dish detergent before you put them on the bow, and I'll show you how I do that. So let's get started. So the first thing I do to prepare the back of the bow, especially with an oilier wood like Osage, is that I just want to clean up the back of the bow, and the best way that I found to do that is to use some like 60 or 80 grit sandpaper and just give the back of the bow a light sanding to remove any dirt or oil that's accumulated on there from me handling it, and just kind of provide a little bit of a rough surface for the skins to adhere to. Now that it's sanded down, I'm going to put the black dye on the back of the bow. So what I use is, I don't know how well you can read it, but it's the Fibings leather dye. Make sure that you get alcohol-based dye, and I just like to use plain black. With a little bit of paper towel, I just simply wipe it on. Now I'm going to stop my skins right out about here and tie them off with a thread wrap. So I'm just going to bring the dye out to where I want it. Probably a good idea to measure and mark, just so you know, and make sure that your skins are going to reach. I can show you here. See, I've got more than enough skin to cover what I want, so I'll probably end up cutting a little bit of skin off. So I've got both sides sanded and stained. Just a quick little note to make the edges look clean and nice. So I was not super careful when I was putting the black stain on as to where it ended. I just kind of brought it out to the edge or maybe slightly over. But if I were just to put the skins on there like that, and then when I clean the skins up on the edge, if the stain is coming all the way out to the edge of the skins, it kind of makes for a little bit of a black line right along the edge of the skins that bugs me. Other people might not even notice it, but for me, I like to have the skins come just a hair past where the edge of the stain is. So what I do now is I'll take like a card scraper here, and I'll just pick an angle that kind of rolls the stain back up onto the edge of the back of the bow a little bit. And I just consistently hold that angle and scrape the stain away. And I'll show you kind of where I end up with it. So I don't know how well you can see that. This is the edge that I scraped, and this is the one that I haven't done yet. So not too far up there, because if the sturgeon skin's coming too far past the edge of the black line, you're going to see that black line through the skin, and it's going to look a little funny. So you're really trying to hit it just at the right amount, so that the black's not coming out too far, but also that it's not coming out far enough. All right, let's see if you can kind of see about what I was shooting for there. Just one of those little things that I've learned along the way. A little tip to help you get it to look just right. Alright, next we want to get the skins ready to fit with the bow. And so I'm going to just kind of lay it down here and see where I might need to trim the skins to get them to match up. So here at this kind of narrow point, I really don't have much width to work with. I'm not going to really trim anything off there, but if you see here, it's really wide, and I'm going to have a lot of extra skin here sticking off that edges. And so we want it to wrap around a little bit to start with. We don't want to try to cut it exactly to the width that we want. So leave yourself some room, but if you have a lot of extra, you can trim off the edges. And then just lengthwise, I want it to overlap a little bit past the middle of the handle. And I'm just going to cut it off square here. So that's just about perfect lengthwise. Now where the skin's really wide here, I'm gonna always use this row of scales as my center line here, but I'm just gonna take off some of this excess width here where it's really wide, erring on the side of leaving myself with more than I need. Don't use your wife's sewing scissors to do this. Alright, so that'll be just perfect for this limb, and I'll do the same on the other limb. Now that I've got my two skins trimmed to cover the areas that I want on the bow, now it's time to soak the skins. So I'm just gonna roll them up here a little bit. And I've got this container of, cool to lukewarm tap water. Don't use hot water. It can denature the skins. But just get them totally submerged. And they need a couple hours, 2-3 hours, to get fully soaked and pliable. If you do it too soon, they're going to be kind of stiff and difficult to work with. Might not even hurt to leave them overnight if you've got the time. But I find a couple hours is usually plenty. So we'll check back in when they're ready. So my skins here have been sitting for a couple hours. And they're nice and soft and pliable. If you're feeling any stiffness in them, let them soak longer until they're feeling really soft. But I'm going to take some dish detergent here. And just on the side that's going to be glued down to the bow, so the side that had the flesh on it, not the outside, I'm just going to put some detergent on there and then just really wash it vigorously together, just in case there's any residual oil left on the skins. And then I'm just going to rinse it off with cool water to make sure I get all the soap off. Just going to lay the skins out here on this towel. Probably best not to use your best guess towels. I'm just going to blot them dry. Before I put my sturgeon skins on, and I do the same with rawhide, is I just want to give it a good stretch, because it's gonna want to shrink, and if I've got it stretched out closer to its tension limits, then when it shrinks, it's going to help provide a little bit of resistance to the bend of the bow. I just kind of get it all laid out like I'm going to want it. So when I'm laying this down, I want to pay really close attention to this center line and make sure that it's not off to one edge or to the other. I want to make sure that it's going to be going down the exact center of the bow the whole way. So to glue the bow, or to glue the skin down, I'm going to use this Titebond 3. It's a waterproof wood glue. Works great for putting on any kind of skins on a bow. No mess, no fuss, real easy to use. Highly recommend it. If you want to go a more natural route, you can use hide glue to put your skins on, but in this video I'm just going to show how to do it with Titebond 3. I'm going to start out here on the end and just put a pretty healthy bead on here and just use my finger to spread it out. I kind of want it to overlap on the edges, and it's okay if the skin gets glued down to the side of the bow. I'm going to trim it off later, but that'll ensure a good bond all the way across the back. You don't want too much, but you don't want to starve it either. So just kind of a nice, even coating. And then remember just to follow that center line really religiously, otherwise it's going to look wonky once it dries. Press out any air bubbles that you can see. We're going to come back later to chase out any air bubbles that may have popped up, but now's a good chance to get ahead of them. It's probably too much glue. I'm going to wipe a little bit off here. So now the skin's laid down. I'm just going to start on one end and work down it, pushing out any air bubbles and making sure that the skin is perfectly centered on the bow. As you can see, the difference between the light side and the dark side is really obvious right now. But once the skin dries and the glue dries, then that black stain underneath is really going to show through on the light side, and it's going to balance them out. And you may be able to tell just the slightest difference between the two, but they'll look pretty darn close. Now's your chance to be really finicky. So take your time. The glue gives you a decent amount of working time. Try not to get glue on top of the skin. So if you're getting glue on your fingers, keep your fingers clean. Okay, now that you've got it all lined up, you've got all the major air bubbles out, I'm going to take this roll of, it's just cut up t-shirt. It's just a t-shirt that's cut into one long strip. I've found that it works good for wrapping skins. It doesn't have much texture to it, like an ace bandage. I feel like leaves too much texture on the skins, but it still lets it breathe. So I get it started on the end, I like to be nice and tight here on the end, but then as I move onto the skin, I just want it tight enough that it's going to hold down the edges. If you crank it down too tight, it's going to leave impressions in the skin that you don't want. So be consistent but gentle, and just make sure as you're going along that the wrap is not shifting the skin to one side or the other or bunching it up at all. So just take your time and watch carefully. I'm going to trim just a little bit off of my end here at the handle. I want the skins to overlap a little, but not too much. Alright, so I'm just going to leave a little bit of the sticking off so that I can do the other side. And then when I get to the middle, I'm just going to put a little bit of glue in between the skins and I'm going to overlap it. Now I'm going to do the other side. Now once I've got this second skin all situated, then I'll just continue this wrap. I like to wrap this transition here fairly tightly, as it has a tendency to want to pull up if it's not wrapped snugly in place. But then again, lighten up a little bit once you get back out onto the regular skin. And as you're going along, you can kind of fight out any last air bubbles. All right, now that I've got the whole thing wrapped up, starting at the handle, I just like to gently work my thumbs down the length, kind of rubbing out towards the edges just in case there's any more air bubbles in there. Now that I've got this all wrapped up, I want to leave it sitting wrapped for about an hour. I want the glue to set up enough that it's holding the skin down so that when I unwrap it, the edges aren't lifting up and the ends aren't coming up. But I still want enough play in the skin and the glue that I can go back over it and look for air bubbles. So I'm going to set this aside for about an hour and then we'll unwrap it. All right, the bow's sat wrapped for an hour. I'm going to go ahead and unwrap it. Now the skin should be good and stuck on, but it should also still be a little bit pliable and the glue should still be a little bit wet underneath. And so now is your best opportunity to hunt down any last air bubbles. If you can force them off to the edge, that's the best. Sometimes there will be a pool of excess glue. You can force that off too. You don't need those pools in there, and when they dry they can leave an air bubble behind where they were. If you get an air bubble that you can't work off to the side, you can use like a needle and lance the skin a little bit and force the air out. Just work your way down really methodically and find every one that you can and push it out. Alright, I've got all the air bubbles worked out on both sides. You'll probably notice that it looks kind of yellowish at this point. That's okay, that's just the glue, but when it dries, it'll dry transparent, and the black will show through. So don't be concerned about its appearance before it's dry. So the last thing I want to do before I set it up to dry completely is to put the bow in a little bit of reverse brace. That will pull the bow into a little bit of reflex so that when the skin dries and as it shrinks, it will work with that reflex and kind of pull the bow into a little bit of reflex and just provide a little bit of extra resistance to the bend, hopefully improving the performance of the bow a little bit. You're not going to notice really big results from something like that, but when you're working with a backing that has some substance like sturgeon skin or rawhide, you can get just a little bit of extra performance out of it if you stretch the skin and you reverse brace the bow. So I'll show you how I do it. Okay, so real quick, what I do to reverse brace it, I've got just kind of a cheap stringer that's got a cup on each end, and I put the cup over the tips and kind of snug them down as much as I can. And then I just have a piece of wood here in the middle that I have it looped around so that I can twist it tight. There probably are better ways to do this, but this is what I came up with, and it works well enough for my purposes. So I just keep twisting this until it kind of draws the tips up in a little bit of reflex. So now I'm just going to set it up here. I'm going to leave the bow here for a few days until the skin is totally dry and all the moisture that I've introduced with the skin and the glue has had a chance to escape. If you want to be extra careful, you can leave it for more, but I've found that a few days is enough to move forward with the project. So after it's dried for a few days, we'll come back to it and I'll show you how to trim up the edges. So I've let the bow sit for a few days to dry out. You can see what it looks like now. The last thing that I really have to do here is to trim the edges of it so that it looks clean and consistent. So to trim the edges, I'm going to use the fine side of the Shinto rasp just to, take off the excess. And then I'm going to come back and clean it up with this handy file. You can really use whatever you've got. Any kind of fine file will do. You don't want a heavy, rough rasp, but it doesn't have to be these specific tools. So for this first pass with the Shinto rasp, I'm going to keep my angle fairly perpendicular. I don't want to come too far up onto the back of the bow with this rougher tool. I'm just trying to get the bulk off the edges. And then I'm going to come back with this file and I'm going to change the angle a little bit and kind of roll the edge of the skin up onto the back of the bow just a little bit. You'll see what I mean. I like this Shinto rasp because it really cuts through the skin quickly, but I have enough control with it that I'm not eating up much wood underneath. After that first pass with the Shinto rasp, the edges are going to kind of look like that. You know, I'm not trying to make them clean and pretty yet. I'm just getting the bulk of the skin off. Now, if you remember when we dyed the back of the bow, there was that edge line that I wanted to stay outside of. I don't know if you can even see it here, but my point is that I don't want to meet that line yet, not with that first pass with a Shinto rasp. I want to keep the edge of the skin outside of that. And then I'm going to use the file to bring it right up close to that so that you can't see that gap where there's some skin hanging out over that black line, and you can see the difference. All right, now with this second pass with the finer file, I'm going to change the angle to be more acute with the back of the bow, so that it's going to roll the skin up onto the back of the bow just a little bit. That'll keep you from having a raggedy looking edge that might be more inclined to lift off, and it'll look better, I think. And this is where I want to pay attention, that I'm not going past that black line of the dye, that I'm staying just on the outside of it so that we don't see a black line underneath the skin on the edge. So if you just maintain that consistent angle down the length of your bow, you should have a real consistent looking edge. It's still going to have some file marks, but when you come and sand the wood of the bow, you'll be able to sand that transition and sand right along that edge and make it real nice and clean. Obviously, you don't want to sand the top of the sturgeon skins because that'll ruin the look of them. Alright, I cleaned up all the edges with the handy file, and I just want to show you kind of what the end result looks like. So just a nice even line down the length of the skin. Right now at this stage it looks like there's kind of a white line there that might even look a little raggedy. But once you sand that down and put finish on it, it'll look a lot nicer, so don't worry about that. Don't obsess over trying to get it perfect at this stage with your tools. Just get a nice consistent line. Watch out for the black dye showing through on the edge. So at this stage, finish any tillering you've got to do. Sand all the wood. Be careful not to sand the skin itself. I've got another video that I just put out showing how to do a thread wrap at the end of the skin. So definitely watch that, because you'll want to wrap that end of the skin down so that it doesn't lift off and so that it looks better. And when it comes to finishing, you can just put your finish of choice over the top of the sturgeon skin just like you would the rest of the wood. I use True Oil. I do about eight coats of True Oil. I put those same coats right over the top of the skins, and it makes them look real nice. So that's how I do my sturgeon skins. I hope you found that helpful. If you're interested in trying them out on your own, I have sturgeon skins for sale, so get in contact with me through my website, swiftwoodbows.com, and I'll be happy to hook you up with some so you can try them out. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.